without much further ado, I don't think it requires too much introduction. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Andrew Loxley, or Professor Andrew Loxley, sorry. He's going to cover the last drop, and he's going to share with us everything we need to know about Vivas, whether they're on Zoom or not, and that we're too afraid to ask. Thank you, Andrew. Over to you.
Thank you, Mary. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a few slides. As most of my students know, I never go anywhere without slides. I'm a slideaholic, I think, as they would probably confirm. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk to you about, and hopefully there's a lot to cover in half an hour, but I'll do my best. It's really some sort of bit of wisdom, probably not so much wisdom, accumulated over the past 20 odd years of being an external examiner in a number of different institutions, supervising something like 20 plus doctoral theses to completion over the past few years. What else have I done? There, worked as an internal examiner as well, probably something like about 30 odd theses. So I've done lots of marking of them. And I've also acted in this strange capacity as a chair of Vivas as well on a fairly regular basis. So I get to see what goes on from that perspective. So I've done quite a lot of work around in Vivas in one form or another. So really just going to share with you some bits and pieces that I've, as I said, that I've accumulated over the years. Please use the chat. Also, if you feel as though you need to ask a question, then do it via the chats. I know that time's a bit short, and I'll try and answer them for you as well. So, as Mary said, this is the last drop, and it really is probably for majority of students doing a doctoral piece or even a sort of master's by research. The Viva component is an exceedingly important part of the process. In fact, it's probably the gateway to getting through the doctorate there. And it isn't something to be taken very lightly either. It's a very significant part of the process. And one of the things I found over the years with my students is to be prepared for it. And preparation, I think, for a Viva is absolutely everything. All the hard work that you've done, the 3, 4, 5, 16, 17,000 million years that you spent on your thesis, is really comes down to, although it doesn't always just come down to that last hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours in your Viva, but a large to extent, it does depend on how you engage in that conversation with your examiners there. And again, it also, you know, it also contingent upon the quality of the work that you produce within the thesis as well. But I'll come on to that. So here's just a quick notion of the PhD doctorate in education journey. For my sins, I also set up and have been running for the past 15, 16 years the School of Educational as Course of Education's professional doctorate as well. As you can see, the graph there is cleaning the kitchen, measured in GIFs by the enthusiasm by the time spent on the study. And as you can see there, you start off with lots of enthusiasm in a dirty kitchen. There's a spike in the middle where the kitchen starts to get cleaned and the enthusiasm wanes. And then towards the end there, you can see you have immaculately clean kitchens there. And then you complete at the end of however long it takes to do the study. So that's very important. I ended up with an immaculately clean kitchen when I finished my doctorate many years ago, and I think those are the students who are this process will also be also having a lot of sort of hygiene related issues as well towards the end of the process. So as I say, what I really just want to talk about is really the pre-Viva processes and preparation, the Viva itself, and then the post-Viva. Again, so there's 3 components to this. What I'm going to talk about is really sort of located within the Trinity context, but for those of you who aren't within Trinity itself, you probably similar kind of processes are involved as well. Again, you just sort of set this in the context of your own institutional regulations and regimes there. But pretty much in all the other institutions that I've done external examining in, there's a similar kind of process which occurs, even though it's sort of contingent upon the institutional rules and regulations themselves. So anyway, just really quickly, if anyone just wants to pop this in the chat. So what's the purpose of the Viva, and what good things have you heard about the process, and what bad things have you heard about it, and how might you prepare for it? And there's a nice Viva from the early 1960s. Just see if I can pop into the chat. Oh, sorry, I can't quite see the chat, Catherine. Sorry.
I can call it out to you if that helps.
Please, yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. There isn't. Shelley says, "What a surprise, Andrew. We love you always." I'm still waiting for people to actually tell you what they think of Vivas. They're all munching through a sandwich, Andrew. Sorry.
Oh, okay then. I'll take it that you all have these great thoughts about it, but we'll share them telepathically amongst each other there. Okay, right. The first thing that I really insist that people do, and I'm always amazed at this of all my students over the years, don't really do this, is that go read the regulations, your institutional regulations about the Viva itself and how the examination is set up and how the examination is conducted. Absolutely crucial that you do that. So part of it is knowing what you're walking into, and what you're walking into is a very formal examination process which is governed by institutional rules and regulations, so do know them. Yeah, Trinity has their own, other institutions have their own as well there. Sometimes it's quite explicit within handbooks and student guidelines. Sometimes it isn't. Again, your supervisor should be able to help you with this. But if you don't know them before the Viva, then do go look at them. They're incredibly important to remind yourself, or at least familiarize yourself with there. Okay, so within Trinity, again, these are Trinity regulations here, that the student can submit the thesis anytime they wish to, but they have to complete a form. There's always a form to be completed in Trinity. It's very, very important that we have forms and you fill them in. The second one is, and this is quite important, is that you don't have to, the student doesn't have to consult their supervisor about this. And then thirdly, they don't have to show the supervisor a final draft, nor do they have to seek approval from their supervisor on this final draft before submitting there. So the students can go ahead and submit it any time they want. It's not a particularly wise thing to do. I'm not quite sure why it still exists in the regulations, but it's not a particularly wise thing to go and do, is to go and submit a thesis without actually A, telling your supervisor you're going to do it, but B, they're not actually looking at a complete final draft beforehand. And again, this comes down to the kind of relationship that you have with your supervisor as well. All of mine, I always insist on seeing a final draft, even though I've looked at chapters as the work has progressed over the years. It's important that me as a supervisor gets a feel for the thing in its entirety, as a narrative, as a piece of text, as a book, before students submit it there. So again, different institutions have different rules and different regulations around that. Okay, this is common. This is pretty common to most institutions I've done external examining, but again, this is sort of a Trinity kind of procedure here, but it would be very, very common in other institutions as well there. The thesis is usually examined by two people. One is an internal examiner, and they're usually from the institution itself, in the case of Trinity, and then there's an external examiner, and this is someone from another institution there again. So there's a balance of expertise, there's a balance of views there that are brought to bear on the process. In Trinity, both of the examiners are nominated by the School of Education, and their appointment is ratified or granted by the dean, in our case the Dean of Graduate Studies, and they can overturn a nomination. I've had that in the past where it's deemed that a person hasn't had sufficient experience, or they're too closely related to the school or to the supervisor. They can actually say, no, go away, think again, find another one there. So ultimately the decision about who the examiners are is decided by the Dean of Graduate Studies in Trinity's case, and that'd be very similar for other institutions as well. What I find is very useful to do when you're heading towards the sort of submission process is start to identify an external examiner, something like about 6 months before the submission. It can take a while to shall we say, work through that particular side of the process. First of all, you need to identify them. Secondly, you need to contact them. Thirdly, you need to sort of get them, ensure that they're happy to do the examination. And then thirdly, that they have got time to do it as well. There again, it's a big undertaking for examiners to mark theses. It usually takes us around about a week from the getting of the thesis to sitting down with it and marking it. They're big pieces of work. They're over 100,000 words long, and for us to give them the time and the attention and the respect they deserve as a piece of work, we usually take about a week to mark them. So again, it's important that the examiners also know how long they got time to spend on this. The other thing is to get the right person for the job, and we usually say that it's quite nice that not only do they need to be an expert in the field, but they also need to be a half decent human being as well. You've got to sit in a room with this person for maybe 2-3 hours and engage in a conversation with them. And again, as a chair of Vivas, I've sat in them where sometimes the examiners haven't been as, so we say, kind as a human being as what we would expect them to be in that situation there. So it's useful to think quite carefully about whom you want to act as an external, and it might not be the first person you think of. You might have to draw up a list of them as well. The other thing is the internal examiner is usually someone within the school, in this case the School of Education there, and it might occasionally be someone from another school if it's very specialised. And we've done that. We've had people from Gender Studies, School of History as well. And again, you go into negotiations with them as a supervisor in terms of trying to sort of ensuring that they're happy to do it. Because again, it might be slightly outside their field for them, but they're happy to. So again, there's a lot of negotiation takes place around the sort of the appointment of the examiners. And the internal examiner as well is usually someone who is knowledgeable in the area, might not necessarily be a complete expert in the field, but will certainly be a knowledgeable person and certainly have enough sort of expertise in both as a researcher and also someone who understands the field to act as an examiner there for you. Okay, right. The mechanics of it, this is the other thing that students tend to be not aware of as well there, that the date and the time of the Viva itself is usually set by the examiners. The students and supervisors don't really have a hand in this unless it really clashes with a particular family event or something that's very difficult to get out of. It usually, and the Viva usually takes place, can usually take place about 3 or 4 months after the submission of the thesis there. Examiners, again, within Trinity, we give them 8 weeks to read and assess the thesis there from the time it's sent out by our graduate studies office there. The whole process in Trinity is centralized. It's not done from the School of Education. Again, different institutions do different things, but normally that period, that 8 weeks, 6 weeks from other institutions is around about the sort of normal period of time. And then negotiations have to be set around the time and date. So you can see that it's not a process that you hand it in one day and the following day you have your Viva. It can be quite a while before that process takes place there. The other thing is that once it's submitted, the job of the supervisor is done and dusted there, and but they might get involved depending on the result at the end of the process there. So the whole thing is handed over to the examiners once you as a student submit your piece. And again, once you submit it, it's submitted. You can't sort of say, well, I really want to hand in chapter 3 because I didn't really like chapter 3, and you hand in chapter 3 again. That's usually considered a big no-no unless you've actually handed in the wrong draft, and that's happened in the past before. And as a supervisor, you have to go creeping and crawling to the Dean of Graduate Studies to allow you to resubmit it. But try and avoid that at all costs.
That leads me, Andrew, actually to one of the first questions is, what is the biggest mistake people make? Handing in the wrong thesis is pretty good.
Oh, geez. Well, that's useful to give your draft to your supervisor to read. Then you avoid that. So do avoid that. Again, one of the things is you need to be very careful of your own sort of filing system as well there. And again, have lots of copies of the thing made, lots of backup copies of it as well, which is really, really important to do that. Particularly day and age now, it's fairly easy. In the olden days when people used to have to handwrite them and get them typed, slightly, mine, not slightly that old, but mine was almost slightly at that typed stage. But that's giving my age away a bit there. So, okay, right. The Viva itself, it's usually undertaken face-to-face, but over the past year we've been doing them virtually, and I've been involved in a number of virtual ones there, and has a different feel to it doing it online, and hopefully we'll be back to doing them face-to-face. It's a much more shall we say embodied experience, quite literally, if we're in the room. But anyway, just to get back to the way in which it'll work, the Viva can take as long as it takes. There, I've been in ones where they've lasted 30 minutes, and I've been in ones where they've lasted 3 hours as well. There, and the length of the time doesn't necessarily have any bearing on what the outcome might be. The one that I was on for 30 minutes, the poor student had to go away and work on the thesis for a year because the examiners decided that he needed a lot of work doing to it. And ones for 3 hours can be that the examiners are very happy with the work and will probably say so at the beginning of the thesis, but they're really engaging a really sort of in-depth conversation with the student there. And again, it depends on your own, institutional regulations there. The new Trinity regulations that we can take a comfort break after 2.5 hours. So those people with sort of good bladder control are all right. Those of us a bit like me are sort of a bit stuffed really in that case. So I never have too much tea or coffee, but either before examining or being a chair of a Viva, unless I take a bucket. But less said that, the better. Now the Viva, again, as I said, the people who are involved in the Viva, usually the 2 examiners, the student, obviously enough, and there's a chair, which is just a person to oversee the proceedings. They will open and close the proceedings and make sure that it's done in a fair and equitable manner as well. And that can be very important, particularly if the examiners might, shall we say, get a little, shall we say, overexcited about their role, and sometimes the chair, and I've had to do this in the past, needs to intervene just to sort of calm proceedings down. Happens very, 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 very rarely. And then the supervisor or supervisors, if you've got more than one, can be there. And again, it's usually by invitation only, and they have no role in the proceedings as well. So they'll just sit quietly in a corner and take some notes and say nothing. But again, it's by invitation. They don't have to be there, but most of the time, again, all the ones I've been involved in, the supervisors are there. But they have no involvement in the process whatsoever, the Viva process itself. Okay, now the other thing that's important to be aware of, and again, different institutions have different rules and regulations in terms of the outcome of the Viva, and also the reading of the thesis itself. So again, it's useful to think that there's sort of two components, that it isn't just based on the Viva, though the Viva is very important. It's also based on the written work as well, even though it might feel that the Viva is really the sort of the final piece and what you're judged on. You're not. You're judged on these two components here. So in Trinity, you can have that it can be passed as it stands, so it's lovely, it's perfect, wonderful, have a doctorate. The second possibility is that you can be given the doctorate, well done, but you need to do some minor corrections, and what constitutes minor corrections is always a very interesting set of debates amongst examiners, and also within the School of Education, and also within the institution as well there. But again, we give 2 months, 8 weeks to do those changes in there. And then the third one is that the thesis, what we call, is referred back for major revisions. So it sort of needs a lot more work doing to it. It's not a doctoral standard, and it's not, students are normally given 6 months to do that, and then it's sent back to the 2 examiners to be marked. Again, there's no second Viva, which is good. Other institutions might do that. I did one in Manchester a few years ago, and there was referred back, and it was referred back for a year, and there was a second Viva. That was part of their regulations. Other institutions don't do that. Then the fourth one is that it's not a doctoral standard, but it can be awarded a master's. There's enough in there to make a master's degree out of it. And the fifth one, and I've never had one of these, either as an examiner or witness it as a chair or as a supervisor, the thesis be failed. That's an incredibly rare occurrence. And okay, so those are the Trinity. Hello?
5 minutes left, Andrew.
How long?
5 minutes.
Oh, jeez, I've been windbagging again. Right. Okay. Just a quick one. Has to be a quick one. Before the Viva, the examiners will have a conversation about the work. Again, depends on the institution, but we write reports and we swap them, and we decide on how we're going to organise the Viva in terms of what particular questions we're going to be asked and who's going to do it and what order they're going to get presented in there. So there's a bit of prep work for the examiners to do as well pre the Viva. Okay, for students, you also need to do preparation work as well. So read your thesis. Very important. Don't discard it completely. That you can take the thesis in with you, and you can take notes in with you. So it's not a test of memory. If it's a test of memory of over 100,000 words, I think most of us will probably fail. So you can take your thesis in with you. You can take notes in with you. And I always insist that my students do that. You can highlight and mark up the text as well there. If you think you want to draw attention to certain aspects of the thesis, you want to draw attention to the supervisors, the examiners too there. The other thing I do with all my students, which is incredibly important, is organise and undertake a mock Viva with your supervisor. So you actually pretend to go through the process, and your supervisor will grill you as though it's an examination. And I find that incredibly useful with my students, because it really gets them in the space. It gets them thinking about what's important, what's not important there. And again, it draws them back into the thesis as well. Sometimes you get to the end of it after 5-6 years of doing it, you just had enough of it, you discard it. And again, this is a way of bringing you back into it to discuss the sort of the macro and the micro, and also the meso features of the work there prior to the Viva. Yeah, very important there. Yeah, there you go. And there you go. Say that. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Now then, this is the important stuff. So what are they going to? So what are they going to ask you within there? And again, it's usually around these 8 particular things. How they'll ask them, where they'll ask them, the specific wording of the question is entirely up to them. But generally, from past experience of being a chair, a supervisor, an examiner, they usually take this following form there. Obviously, things like, why have you done it? What have you done? So what's the substantive area? How have you done it? The methodology. Who's used to inform? So what are the theoretical grand fromages that you've drawn on, and why have you drawn on them? What have you found? So what have you found of all this sort of years of crawling around, sending out questionnaires, or sitting at the back of classrooms, or interviewing people, or ploughing through historical documents? So what have you got out of it? What have you found? And then the other thing is, what's your contribution to knowledge? And again, a doctoral thesis is intended to be a contribution to knowledge. So think about, what is your contribution? And that might be an opening question that examiners use. So what have you brought to the table? What is your contribution to the world of educational research? Then the other thing that's quite important, and these usually get asked at the end of the Viva, is what do you do next? What's your future research plans from what you've done? And then there's a sort of also another final sort of reflexive set of questions. What have you learned about research through doing research as well there? And that's really important. Again, if you think about the PhD, the DEd, EdD thesis is as much about learning how to be a researcher as it is about doing a piece of research there. And we're always intrigued as examiners about what have you learned. And some of the learning comes through the thesis itself, through the written text. But again, the Viva is a real opportunity for examiners to explore that in more depth, and in fact explore many facets of the thesis in more depth. And again, there's usually two angles that we take when we're examining the Viva. It's usually we're looking for clarification of stuff. Again, if you've written something in the thesis that we're not entirely sure what you mean, or do you really understand it, we'll sort of dig into it in the Viva. Or it might be a case that we're happy to have a much deeper conversation with you about certain aspects about your methodology, your analytical strategies, your use of Foucault or Habermas or Giddens as part of your theoretical framework, which goes beyond the scope of what you've written there. Sometimes it can feel as though it's an interrogation, but a lot of time it really is just the examiners wishing to engage in a critical conversation with you. How am I doing, Catherine?
Yeah, you can wrap it up there.
Oh, jeez, I'm only halfway through. Yeah, cruel people. I'm not doing this again. Anyway, so there's a few more slides here, and I've gone into a bit more detail on those questions, which if people are more than welcome to have the slides and they can dig into that. And I shall wrap up here. Okay, I think. Yeah. Oh, that's my last slide. Shouldn't have my slides back. Okay, right. So post Viva is that you'll get, most of the time, again depending on the institution, but in Trinity you'll usually get the outcome at the end of the Viva, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 or a 5. Irrespective of where you land up on there, you'll just get a brief overview of that. You won't get much of a detailed sort of post Viva what's the word for it, sort of set of feedback there. The examiners will draw up a snag list, a list of things that they want you to do to the thesis. Okay, if you end up on a 2, 3 or a 4 there, in Trinity's case there, then they pass this on to the internal examination, the internal examiner, and again, then this is discussed with the student and the supervisor, and some kind of plan of action is put into place there. Now then, the other thing that's important to note is, particularly in the case of Trinity, if you end up on a category 2, the minor revisions, then it's the supervisor that looks out for the changes, and the examiner approves the changes as well. So your supervisor looks after the process, but it goes back to the examiner really just to make sure that you've done what you've been asked to do. And then, as I said earlier, category 3 is that it gets examined again by both the intern and the extern, but there is no Viva. Other institutions do different things, and if you really don't like what's going on, there is an appeals process, and that's written in the sort of TCD calendar. And again, all institutions have an appeals process as well there if you're not happy with the result for whatever particular reason. But it's very rare that people appeal, because we tend to sort of get through the process, and most of the time we don't let you submit your piece of work unless it really is ready to submit. So hence the very important thing that do show it to your supervisor before you submit, to avoid getting into a bit of bother post Viva or even during the Viva. So that's sort of it. That's my sort of bit of wit and wisdom over 20 odd years of doing all the sort of Viva-y stuff. So that's me, and you're more welcome to the slides.